Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
Welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Back to the Father here on the Guadalupe Radio Network. We are on all the GRN platforms like YouTube and X and Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, and Rumble. I think I named all of them, and this is a show that is dedicated to the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas in his famous Summa Theologia. And I need to turn my audio down on my computer just like that. There we go. Sorry about that. Cecil reminds me of that all the time, and I always forget. All right, well, welcome. And on the program today, I want to give you a recap of an experience I had last night speaking to the Legatus Chapter of the Diocese of Dallas. A great group of people. These are like CEOs, business leaders, businessmen and women, and their spouses. And can be a little intimidating, I admit. I mean, these are pretty, high-level people in their companies, but I've always found them to be super friendly, super engaging, welcoming. And so I'll tell you about that. And also, interestingly, in the Q&A section, you never know what you're going to get in the Q&A section. And I'm going to hold off on that until a little bit later after I talk about what I talked about at the event. But one question asked last night is a question I almost always get every single time I present on St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay, so it's one that I've answered countless times, and it came last night, and so it didn't surprise me at all. The other one was a question that I've never been asked, and it was really deep and almost a little embarrassing because I didn't really know how to answer, and I've always been told if you don't have an answer and you don't have experience in the question that's asked, well, just admit it, admit the ignorance and move on, because rather than try to pretend you know something that you don't. And so I asked Cecil about it before we started, but I'm going to hold on to that one because I want to kind of set the stage about what exactly the event was all about. And I also want to kind of throw out the question, is it better to live in blissful ignorance or complicated explanations of things? Okay, and the reason I ask that, and Cecil, you can, is that sometimes, I would even say oftentimes when I give a talk or even something like this show, and you're kind of digging into stuff and you're talking about philosophy and, as I give a talk and last night and talking about, substance and Plato and Aristotle and all this kind of deep stuff, I always get the sense from some people in the crowd, it's just like, I don't really want to know all this, but it's really, I don't know. It's kind of like the question that the guy asked me. Okay, I'll give you a hint. It was about quantum physics.
Oh,
all right.
Everyone just went,
quantum physics. And in my response, when he asked me, it was like, I'm going to go do some research on that. He gave me the topic of a video that he wanted me to watch on something I had absolutely no experience in. But I had a sense of curiosity. I already watched the video, and I'm going to talk about it at the end of the program today. And I learned something. It's not my strength, quantum physics. In fact, I don't even know what quantum physics is. I still don't know that I know what quantum physics is. I mean, do you know what quantum physics is? I mean,
only what I've learned from Avengers movies and things like that.
Okay, so if you're out there, I mean, what is quantum physics? What does that even mean? Okay, I'm already defying what I said. I said I'm going to wait till the end to talk about it, but I will get into it, and I'll tell you about the video that the guy said as well. So is it better to live in, blissful ignorance and just kind of like, dude, I just kind of want to live my life and kind of saunter through life without thinking too deeply about things? Or would you rather dig in and go deep with stuff? And I will say that one of the main topics that I talked about, and something that I'm utterly fascinated with, and I think I talked about this last week as well, and I'll probably keep talking about it until I wear everybody out and drive you all away, is the Eucharist. Because the Eucharist is the most fascinating aspect of our faith. I think the Trinity and the Eucharist are the two most fascinating, the two most complicated, and seemingly paradoxical teachings of the Catholic faith. But the more I think about it, it's just utterly fascinating that our God Jesus Christ, body, blood, soul, and divinity, can subsist in what looks clearly like a wafer. And I think most of us are just like, yeah, okay. You either like, nah, I don't believe that, or I do believe it, and we'll move on with our life. And I'm like, no, I want to dig into this because that's kind of what I talked about last night, which I'll tell you about. So, all right. So I started off, speaking to this group of executives and their spouses in talking about, the topic of the talk was how to think like St. Thomas Aquinas. Okay, how to think like St. Thomas Aquinas. And I said, St. Thomas kind of has earned a seat at the table, so to speak. We should pay attention to how he thinks because this guy lived 750 years ago, and he hasn't really lost any of his popularity. Now, there have been times when interest in Aquinas has kind of ebbed and flowed, and there's been ups and downs. I think there was a time probably 30, 40 years ago where people weren't paying as much attention to Aquinas. But then he comes back and he becomes very popular, and then he might wane a little bit. But I don't think he'll ever stop being relevant, not only in the Catholic Church, but in the world in general, because I think he does have the perennial philosophy. It's the one that makes the most sense. And so that's kind of what I talked about. And I do want to thank my friend Jerry Jacob, because he's the one that invited me. He was there last night with his wife, Judith. And you know who else was there?
Who?
Rich Kelly.
Oh, very nice. Our good friend, Rich Kelly.
Yeah, Rich had told me at the last committee meeting. Rich is a local Catholic, great guy. And he told me at the last meeting that he had two things scheduled for February 20th. One of them was the Legatus meeting when I was going to speak at. And he said the other one was like a business event in New Orleans that he was going to go to that I think would probably involve some socializing and some business. And I told him, well, Rich, that's a no-brainer, man. I'm going to New Orleans if I'm you. Why would you come to my talk if you've been invited to New Orleans? So I just assumed he wasn't going to be there. And lo and behold, Rich Kelly shows up. And it almost made me think like, oh, gosh, I better make this good.
He skipped New Orleans for you.
He skipped New Orleans. And so it was great to see him there. You know who else was there was Matt and Chris Kramer. And I was surprised to see them because 2 nights from now, tomorrow night,
yes.
but 2 nights from yesterday, the Catholic Foundation has their big award dinner. I love this event. It's so much fun. Hank Herman is going to be honored, and probably have about 1,000 people there, if not more. And so that's going to be at the Anatole Hotel in Dallas. And Sissel and her friend are going. Paula and I are going to go. So I'm really looking forward to that as well. And so that's what I did last night. And I also was talking about kind of a philosophical approach to the Eucharist. And this is where I'm sure some people are like, oh, man. All right, seriously? I mean, did we really brave sub-freezing temperatures to drive across town to hear some guy talking about this? But I think it's important. I think, the Eucharist is too sublime and too amazing, to just kind of just believe it and then move on with your life, or in some cases not believe it and move on with your life. I think it should be investigated and studied, and a little bit more sense of curiosity about the Eucharist. So I mentioned Thomas Aquinas's connection to the Eucharist. And I don't know if there is any other saint who, well, I'm sure there may be, arguably there could be some, but I don't know that there are any other saints that could not more obviously be connected to the Eucharist than St. Thomas Aquinas, because how many saints were asked by a pope to write the liturgy for a new feast which is devoted to the body and blood of Jesus Christ? Mm-hmm. So, I mean, there's no other saint. So Pope Urban IV in 1264 decides that he's going to have a special feast that's going to focus on the Eucharist, the body and blood of Jesus. The feast is Corpus Christi, right? So he goes to St. Thomas Aquinas, and he says, hey, I know you're busy. You're at the University of Paris. You're teaching. You're writing this Summa Theologia thing. I mean, I know you're busy, but, if you want something done, ask a busy person, right? That's I'm just making up that conversation. I'm not sure that actually happened, but and he said, "Well, you write the liturgy." Well, he did, and so to this day, 750 years later, when we go to the feast of Corpus Christi, that is a mass that was written by St. Thomas Aquinas. The other thing is when you go to adoration, you will likely have chant or sing Tantum Ergo Sacramentum, Pangua Lingua, which means sing my tongue, O Salutaris Hostia, O saving victim, Adoro te devote, humbly I adore thee. Pretty much all of the hymns that are almost exclusively played at adoration were written by St. Thomas Aquinas. I mean, he is the Eucharist guy. All right. He also said that he received more inspiration by being in adoration and placing his head against a tabernacle than he did in all the books that he read. Okay, so this is a guy that was deeply, deeply, deeply devoted to Jesus Christ in the Eucharist. And, of course, the famous story at the end of his life, and he's in adoration or at Mass, of course, kind of the same thing. And he has a mystical experience with Jesus Christ. And Jesus says, Thomas, you have written well of me. What will be your reward? And he said, nothing but thee, my Lord. And then he stops writing the Summa. The last full section of the Summa that he wrote was on the Eucharist. And so this guy has got some bona fides when it comes to the Eucharist. And so I think we need to pay attention to what he wrote about the Eucharist and also just how his philosophy can help us to have a greater devotion and understanding of the Eucharist. So I think last week I probably mentioned. I mentioned the Pew study last week when we were talking about.
Yes, we did.
Yeah,
We did
31% of the mass-going Catholics. Okay, not just Catholics, mass-going Catholics don't believe in the real presence of the Eucharist, and so I said maybe we have some kind of a philosophical kind of understanding of it, and maybe that'll help us. Because what else are we going to do to try? I mean, you look at that number. 31%, actually, in some ways, it surprises me it's that high, because that's a tough teaching, and
I wonder what the statistics would be on the people who think that they are completely confused or don't believe really in the Trinity. Because that's also very intense.
That's an interesting question, because nobody ever asked that anymore.
Nobody ever asked that because I think probably because it's kind of understood that we don't need to fully grasp it to believe in God and stuff like that. We don't have to grasp it. We have to believe it, but we don't have to because we can't. It's above us. Fully grasp it anyway. But I'm wondering if there's a lot of people who are just it's so confusing. I don't even think I agree with it. You know what I mean?
But wouldn't the Eucharist be in the same category?
Yeah, I think so. Although, but the Eucharist, it just, I don't know. Maybe in my head, the Eucharist makes a lot more sense than to at least explain. Not saying that it's that it's not any harder to grasp, but I think it's easier to explain, because I think trying to say that one, God is three persons is harder than saying okay, maybe I'm just maybe I just believe the Eucharist is out. And don't struggle as much with that. But
yeah, but it is funny that when they ask these questions on the surveys, you're right. They never say only 42% of all practicing Catholics believe that there are three persons in the Trinity, in the Godhead. They never ask that question. And one thing I can think of is that was settled so long ago. Whereas, the doctrine on transubstantiation was 11th century. I think it was Lateran IV or something like that. I mean, that's still a long time ago. That's 1,000 years ago. But I don't know. Why not ask the other questions? Why not say, hey, do you think Mary was assumed into heaven? Do you think that Jesus had two natures? I mean, it's always the Eucharist. But I think it makes sense, because if it's kind of a litmus test of how good of a Catholic you are, I think, because if you believe in the Eucharist, then I think you're probably not going to leave the Catholic Church and all that. But here's the rub, though. I don't know, and maybe I'm being a little too hardcore here, but if you really believe, truly, deep in your mind, in your heart, in your soul, and that the Eucharist is Jesus Christ, do we act like how we act in Mass? I mean, do you get distracted? Do you? And again, I'm pointing the finger at myself as well, because I've been to events like Fullness of Truth, and they will always have a Eucharistic procession, like Father Ken Geraci. Do you remember? Yeah,
Oh,
you
yes,
remember
of course
Father Ken Geraci, and he will, and they'll take their time with this, and it goes very slow. And Dave and Lauren Moore are playing, background, music, and Father Ken will take the monstrance, and the lights will be low, and it's kind of cool, and he'll walk very slowly down the aisles with the Blessed Sacrament. And then he'll periodically stop in front of somebody, for, I don't know if it's just kind of random or how he decides, but very slowly. And, and again, it'll take 30, 45 minutes for him, but there are hundreds of people, or if not thousands sometimes at some of these events. And you look at the people, and I hate to judge, and I shouldn't be looking at the people. I should be thinking about Jesus, guilty as charged. But you look at some of the reactions of the people, and you say to yourself, that person believes. You just, the way they're looking, just the mannerism. And it's like, that's the way it should be. I mean, and again, I hate to say this, but it's not my reaction. I'm not there yet. But they are crying. They can't take their eyes off the monstrance. They're sometimes shaking. They're trembling. They're, and then when Jesus moves, they're moving and pointing in that direction. And it's just like, okay, that's it. That's what I want to have, and I don't know that I have it yet, but
True,
But if you're kind of like, that's happening, and you're kind of like on your phone or checking emails or something,
kind of looking at your watch, like, when is this going to be done?
Yeah, which I got to admit, so
I've done it before.
sometimes I do.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm like, okay, I think when are we going to move on? Or because a lot of times I'm emceeing,
So you're like, oh, I need to be watching the time.
but again, I think it's great to see that. The other day, Paula, my dear wife, showed me a video, and it was a whatever those things are called. Is it called like a little quick little?
A GIF or something like that, or like a short or something.
Yeah, like a little short, and it was from some Spanish-speaking country, Argentina or something. But it was a father and a young girl, and she was probably about 3 or 4 years old. And it was a situation where they were in front of the Blessed Sacrament, and the little girl looked up, and then she reached out and she touched the monstrance. And all of a sudden, her whole face changed, and it just was the whole disposition changed, and she started to weep, and she puts her head down, and then she turns away, and it's almost like she was saying, I'm not worthy. And this is like a 4-year-old girl, and it's a beautiful, beautiful video. And then there must be somebody, like another person she knows behind her, because then she like goes into his arms, like, I need to be held, and it was amazing. And I don't even know how you can find it. Maybe do a search for little girl and Eucharist, but it's such an amazing, beautiful thing. But all this is to say is that, somehow, some way, we should really be trying to increase our own devotion to the Eucharist, because it's either real or it's not. It's either God or it's not. And if it's not, like St. Paul says with the resurrection, then we're foolish. We're crazy to devote ourselves to something that is a lie. But if it's real, my goodness, this should be something that absorbs every fiber of our being. Okay. So what I said at the meeting last night is I talked about the real presence. I think I may have talked about this a little bit last week, so I'm not going to regurgitate all of it. But when you look at the Blessed Sacrament, and we think this is kind of a theological truth that transubstantiation, it becomes the body, blood, soul, divinity of Jesus Christ. But we're still looking at something material, right? So realism would say that there's something beyond that. Okay, a realist, even if it was just a piece of bread, a realist would say there's something beyond it because there would be breadness. Okay, there would be something beyond the physical. But with transubstantiation, we're asked to go beyond that and say not only is there something real, but it's something that deceives our senses, because our senses are telling us it's a piece of bread. And then you got to go one step further and say, okay, it's not what my senses think it is. It's actually something else. And so there's like a double layer of realism there. Nominalists and empiricists would have us believe that there's nothing beyond the sensible experience, right? So, so I want to go to the Q&A section. And by the way, if there's, okay, Lisa is here. Hi, Lisa. Thanks for joining us again. If Timoteo is here, I don't know that he is. I did add you to the email list, Timoteo. And so thank you for being on the email list. And if you have any comments or questions about this, please, by all means, add them to the chat. And I'd love to know what your thoughts are on this. And so, so I gave my presentation, and there were a number of questions. I always appreciate when people ask questions. The question that I'm always asked, you want to take a guess at what it is? Like almost every time I give a presentation on St. Thomas Aquinas, I'm asked the same question.
Ooh.
Almost invariably.
Is it where should we start with for studying St. Thomas Aquinas?
Exactly. Exactly. It's like, hey, if I want to get started, what should I do? And I it's a tough question because not everybody. You should start
printing like a list of like, here are some ideas
for frequently asked questions.
No, I was going to say like there are a list of these are books I recommend or these are podcasts or videos. You just like
yeah, right. You have like a QR code.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so I'll just hold it up and say, okay. This is the QR code for the frequently asked questions at the end of my presentations. So that, I often say, G.K. Chesterton's Dumb Ox book, or Peter Kraft, he's written a lot of different books. And one person asked me about the AI image of Thomas Aquinas that Toya had actually sent that over to me. There's like an AI, like representation of what St. Thomas Aquinas would look like. Somebody asked me about St. Thomas's skull that's touring around the relic of St. Thomas Aquinas' skull, and that's a real thing. I mean, they really do have his skull that's like on tour.
This is going to sidetrack us slightly, but you mentioned like the skull. There's a video I think Catholic Answers put out recently, and it's talking about that we have St. Paul's bones, I think is what it was. And if they made it a meme where it's like a husband and wife traveling together, and the wife's like, why are TSA pulling us aside? And it's like the caption of the video, it's like, we have the bones of St. Paul's. Sorry, that just made me laugh a lot.
Yeah, that is kind of...
It's something, I imagine those people
so they want to know, like what is that?
Why do you have the bones of somebody? I mean, can you imagine the people, though, that travel around with some of these relics sometimes? I wonder what that's like if they get stopped at TSA.
Yeah. Are you like big on relics?
I enjoy being able to go to that, like being able to attend the events. I may not be like go well out of my way to go to one, but I think every time I do, I think it's just being able to go there, and if nothing else, just you get to sit and walk around and look at all these names and just remembering how many great saints we have, and just asking for their intercession, and just remembering that they live life similar to you, and that they made it. They can help you make it, sort of thing.
But it's like,
it's very popular.
Have you been to the chapel at UD?
Yes, I have. Yes.
And they have that reliquary with all those relics, and they've got Aquinas and Catherine of Siena and a whole bunch of them. And I'll always go up close and kind of read. And it's always like in like a different, like it doesn't say like St. Thomas Aquinas. It's always like in a different like Thomas Aquina.
Pretty sure it's in Latin. That they put it in.
Yeah, they put it in Latin.
They often do. No, I enjoy being able to go. And anytime there's an event with relics, it brings out everybody. So many people come to those.
Yeah, I'm thinking like, my father, passed away, and if there was like a little bone chip or a piece of hair of my dad or something. Just thinking like, how meaningful would that be to me? And do people ever keep relics of their loved ones that aren't saints? I mean, yeah, like a lock of hair or something?
I don't know about like first class relics, but I'm sure lots of people have like items that they possessed. It's an interesting thing though. There are, I don't know if you've heard the story of some of when Mother Teresa was, getting up in age and getting, more ill and having more health issues. Some of her sisters actually started taking some of her saris that she would wear, her habit, and started keeping them separated because they were like, she's going to be a saint. We should hold on to these things. But they actually got scolded by her because she's like, we can reuse these. We need to use these for the poor. Don't be throwing.
Yeah, that is kind of, that's an interesting thought because the probably the only future canonized saint that I ever met and touched and had an encounter with would be Mother Angelica, who I met on several occasions. I told you the story about how she prayed for me, right? Yeah. And she held my hand, and then she wouldn't let go, and that's like one of my great and most exciting stories. I don't think there's anybody else who could possibly be canonized. Maybe you, Sissel. I'm not sure.
But Dave, you're not insinuating that I would die before you and have enough time to be like. So I'm gonna die young, if that's the case.
But and
I'm not there yet. I'm not holy enough yet.
But I never thought about the fact when I met Mother Angelica. People joke around like they'll grab a piece of hair or something, from somebody that you think may be canonized as a saint one day. And anyways, okay, so the question that Rich Kelly actually asked a question, and his had to do with, how Rich is a real straight shooter, and he was kind of thinking about, because the whole kind of the topic that I was talking about was this whole truth and reason being on trial, and what can we really know, and realism versus nominalism, and his point, if I got it right, was that, there's always going to be relativists. There's always going to be people that think truth is relative. And so kind of like, what's the point? Because if I try to convince somebody that there's a real truth out there, that's my truth, and they may not agree, and they're a relativist. And it almost seemed like there was a futility in trying to prove that something real exists because that's my truth, and somebody else may be a relativist and that kind of thing. And the only thing I could think of and answer that, I said, well, we just have to be creative in the way we present our truths. And St. Thomas Aquinas would say that the truth ultimately resides with God. And then we have to conform ourselves to the truth that resides in God. But anyways, I'm not sure I answered that adequately. But the one that really got me was the quantum physics question, because this relatively young guy, raised his hand, and here I am, the expert up there. And I said, yeah, what's your question? And he said, how do you think this presentation and this teaching on philosophy relates to quantum physics? and it's funny because
Dave is so much braver than I am to just be answering random questions like this. You have no idea what's going to come.
And the funny thing is that this guy, and I ended up asking Jerry for his contact information because I want to carry on the conversation with this guy. But this guy started off prefacing his question by saying, hey, I graduated from Baylor, and so a lot of the stuff that you're talking about, kind of like, boom, over my head. And so I'm like, oh, good, I'm going to get an easy question, because it all went over his head. And I was like, I don't know, because I guess Baylor being a Baptist college and not Catholic, he would have thought maybe that they wouldn't have as much, of this kind of information. But at any rate, so then he says, how does this relate to quantum physics? And I had to just say, I have no idea. And then I talked to him afterwards, and it was really interesting because he suggested that I do a search on YouTube and watch like a 10-minute video, which I have. It's called the Double Slit Experiment. Okay. Has anybody out there ever heard of the Double Slit Experiment?
Absolutely not.
And I asked you beforehand. I actually went down and talked to Kent as well about this. Kent Loney, our chief engineer. He's a pretty bright guy. And I said, Kent, what is quantum physics? And And Ken kind of laughed, and I said, "No, seriously." I said, "What? I mean, do you know what quantum physics is?"
Isn't it something about like how matter and something with something with matter and the universe and how it relates or something like that? I don't know.
I think you're right, but
That's as close as you're gonna get from me.
And I think what triggered the question is that, first of all, I mentioned how Bishop George Berkeley, who was an Anglican bishop and lived in the 17th, early 18th century, he denied the existence of matter. Okay, he said it didn't exist; it's only in the mind, and that's what's called idealism. Idealism is when you believe that all matter is mind dependent. We talked about this last week. Mind dependent. It doesn't exist on its own. It only exists in the mind. And Berkeley said that all things exist in God's mind, which Thomas would agree on that, but that it doesn't have any existence itself. Okay, it doesn't per se have existence. It's only existent in the mind. And so, and then his famous quote was, "To be is to be perceived," which means that if you're not perceived, you don't exist. Okay, and he had some pretty decent examples. So like if something, you mentioned the tree in the forest. Like if something, if nobody's there to perceive it, then it is actually there, right? And so the double slit experiment, if I can explain it, and it definitely ties in, and I'm glad I mentioned this during my answer. It ties into what we talked about a couple of weeks ago with Gottfried Leibniz. Do you remember that? Gottfried Leibniz.
Totally. Totally.
Gottfried Leibniz was the rationalist philosopher. He followed Descartes and Spinoza. Remember, Spinoza was the God and nature is one. He was the pantheist. There's only one substance. Whereas we would believe that there are as many substances as there are things in the world, and even an angel would be a substance because it's a thing, right? But Spinoza said there's only one substance. So he was a pantheist. Everything is God. Everything is nature, and it's all one and the same. Okay, so we're nature, we're God, we're just an extension of God. Georg Hegel would have been in pretty much agreement with this. The materialists would say there's only matter. Okay, so there's a lot of difference of opinion in this kind of stuff. So when I mention these kind of things, this is what triggered the gentleman to ask the question about quantum physics, because it has to do with matter. And I think Sissel has a greater understanding of quantum physics than I do. But if anybody, okay, so Lisa.
Yeah, Lisa just said particles and waves, and kind of what I've on my very brief little bit of research is that it is basically the fundamental theory that describes the behavior of nature below the scale of atoms.
Yeah, okay.
So very, very small.
Yeah,
very small.
So let me go back to the pre-Socratic philosopher Democritus, okay? Democritus, potato, however you want to pronounce his name. But Democritus, pre-Socratic philosopher, living in 500 BC, comes up with an atomic theory of saying that the entire world is based on unsplittable tiny little atoms. Well, he was kind of right in some ways, that the world is composed of atoms, but I guess it was proven that even the atom can be split, right? And so that's pretty brilliant for a guy living, that long ago. And so then you have somebody like Epicurus, who was influenced by Democritus, and he comes up with an ethical theory based only on, pleasure, okay, only on what we can sense, what we can feel, and that kind of thing, right? So you have Democritus influencing Epicurus, who also influenced somebody like, who was it, Machiavelli. And, who was the other one? Leviathan, wrote Leviathan. Somebody help me here.
Oh, wrote Leviathan? Oh, gosh.
It's on the tip of my tongue. Who? No, Thomas Hobbes. Yeah, okay. Thomas Hobbes was a materialist. Thomas Hobbes believed that people are just react out of passion, and that we're all basically out for ourselves and to satisfy our pleasures. and left without any kind of law or restrictions, we'd all just kill each other because we're all fighting for food, and we're basically like beasts. And so that's why he in Leviathan advocated for a tyrant, that people hand over their rights to a tyrant who will at least keep order, and then at least you have peace and tranquility and nobody's killing each other because we're all beasts. All right, so this is the influence of materialism. This would be pretty much the opposite of idealism, because materialism means there's nothing beyond the material, whereas the idealist says there's no material. There's no matter. It's all in the mind, okay? So again, I'm tying all this into the Eucharist, because if you don't understand this kind of stuff and we want to believe that what we can sense, is actually physically there, but then there's something beyond it, does it relate? I don't know. But it doesn't hurt to learn this stuff, does it? There's a few comments. Are there, Sissel? Is there anything
Yes. Lisa was saying an invisible web of probability but random acts within the field. I think she's still referring to quantum physics. I'm going to say maybe Lisa knows more than both of us.
Lisa's smart.
Lisa's very smart. I agree. And then and Jeff was commenting on the why do only the name of the show, which is why do 30% of mass-going Catholics in the U.S. believe in the real presence, and he's saying maybe it's because the church allows people who are not ordained priests or consecrated bishops to distribute the Blessed Sacrament, which but I understand the argument, and I think I tend to agree, because I think the reason why lay people are allowed to distribute Holy Communion, and again, the church allows it. So, I follow with somebody like Father Donald Calloway. I've heard him speak, and he has a lot of problems with things. I mean, he girl altar servers and communion on the hand, but he'll always say, hey, the church allows it, so and he's only given his suggestions. But I would tend to agree, but I think the reason why we have lay extraordinary ministers is because of time. You have so few priests, and but it all goes back to, like, what would you rather do than spend more time with Jesus at Mass? And if communion takes 30 minutes rather than 10, so be it, so maybe the Mass is an hour and a half, and it's not an hour, because there's only one priest. At my parish, it's a small parish, but the one presiding priest, Father Steinbrook, distributes Holy Communion to everybody. He doesn't have to do it this way, and he also doesn't just say the body of Christ. He has this longer form that he uses, and I don't even know what he says, but it's more than the body of Christ, and he goes slowly, and it takes a long time. But again, I think, if this bothers me, it's more my problem than his. That it's taking a long time to distribute Holy Communion. But okay, so real quickly, the double slit experiment is interesting, because what he says is that you get like a board, a piece of wood, and it's got two slits in it, right? And maybe they're a few inches apart. And then you have another board beyond it. And he said if you shine light through it, the light particles are going to obviously go through the two slits, and they're looking at what do they do when they get to the other side, and how do they act, and how do they impose themselves on that other board. And it ends up being a pattern of like bright and dark and bright and dark. And so that's that. And then, at least in the video that I saw, they took the double slit and they made it horizontal, and they dumped sand through it. And they said, well, what does sand do? Something that clearly has physical, tangible matter. And of course, it finds its way through the slits, and then it makes these two little mounds that look like two little, mini mountains, right? And then they take it and they do atoms. Now, I don't know. I guess they can have like some little device that shoots atoms, and so they shoot a whole bunch of atoms, and they look at the way that the atoms react as they go through the slits, and then they go and they somehow are able to detect when they get on that second board and what they do, and they kind of mimic the light, and they make these little lines, and then they take another step, and and so anyway, they're just trying to see like what is the behavior of these atoms.
And it seems to me, and somebody can correct me, and I need to do a little bit more research on this, but it seems to be that the theory is that the atoms almost in some way are acting independently of each other. Okay, like it's like and this would fall in very much into Gottfried Leibniz's theory of monadology. Because remember, he said that the world is made up of an infinite number of monads, and each monad carries in and of itself, it's like a little soul or something, right? Every single one, and it's just like an infinite number of them, and they're all working independently. And he thought that God was directing all the monads to act in a certain way. And I think, just looking at this double slit experiment, that's kind of what they're saying that these atoms are acting like, is that they're not acting just totally randomly. There's something, I don't know. It's almost like they know what to do. But yeah, interesting. And I need to do a little bit more research on that. But that's the double slit experiment of quantum physics that I was asked about on my talk about how to think like St. Thomas Aquinas.
About not quantum physics.
We had nothing to do with quantum physics. But you know what? I'll just leave you with this. In centuries past, and as I recall now, I think I've said this before, but it's been a long time. Philosophy was much broader than it is now. Now, when people think of philosophy, they think of this very narrow area of study where it's like the mind and how we figure out existence and ontology and epistemology and that kind of stuff. And most people are just like, I don't know, that just seems too deep, it's too abstract, and that that kind of thing. And it's Plato and Aristotle and Nietzsche and Kant or whatever. But, back in the past, I mean, even going back 500 years, philosophy was the overarching science of all things. And so everything fell under philosophy. And so you had even Sir Isaac Newton's famous book was like the natural philosophy of science or something like that. He mentions the word philosophy, and Isaac Newton was writing about matter and in physics and motion and that kind of stuff. But that all fell under philosophy. And the proof of this is that to this day, when somebody gets an advanced degree at a university, it's called a PhD, right? A doctorate of philosophy. And it doesn't matter if it's English or theology or history or political science, it's always going to be called a doctorate in philosophy, PhD, because they're still using the old formula of this is an area of philosophy. And so I guess my point is that when I'm asked a question about quantum physics in a talk about philosophy, that's very fitting. Okay, that because it should, and as I explained to this gentleman yesterday, is that there is like the Venn diagram with all these different disciplines overlapping with each other. Because if you look back at somebody like Aristotle was like the father of meteorology. He was the father of so many. He had animals of all kinds and types. He was studying the habits of animals and nature and everything. So he didn't limit himself to just like, I'm going to think about being or existence and that kind of thing. Aristotle, I don't know that there's ever been another person like him, because he perfectly combined what we would call today the natural sciences, the material sciences, and the science of the mind. But I don't think he ever saw them as being entirely separate. I think he saw this as one unified way of seeing the world. And again, it all goes back to the Eucharist. This is matter and form, okay? This is the form and the matter, the substance of what it is. It changes. But if we never ask the questions that I think are a little deeper than just, oh, okay, I believe, 70% of people don't believe, but hey, all right, we'll move on. I think we should ask those questions. All right. that's my bottom line.
Everyone tuned in today, and we're not expecting to go into quantum physics and so many other things, I'm sure. But Lisa, by the way, says that if you want a modern take on the monad take, look at Sir Haramine, and it looks like he's a young physicist today.
Okay, how do you spell that?
Haramein. And if you just Google him, his first name is Nassim, I believe. I'm assuming this is the right person.
Sounds like
Lisa.
like a Middle Eastern kind of guy.
And he has like one of the first videos I see from him is talks about quantum physics. So he definitely is someone who is knowledgeable in this area.
Yeah,
but.
And I think that's one of the reasons. I saw there's some comment by Lisa about it's all one. I think that's one of the reasons why there is a tendency towards pantheism, is because the pantheists, at least in their defense, and I'm certainly no pantheist, and that would be heretical to be a pantheist, is at least they see the unity of the world. They see how everything is interrelated with each other, and they take this to an extreme, like Thales of Miletus, the first Western philosopher, and said everything's water, right? It's all water. Well, he was saying there's something that's uniting all this. There's got to be one. He was a monist. There's got to be one substance. There's got to be one element or whatever that all of it shares, and that's what I think is that's why there's a lot of pantheistic religions to this day. Georg Hegel was a pantheist. Stoics are pantheists. I mentioned Baruch Spinoza was a pantheist. Some pretty legitimate in the sense of respected philosophers are very pantheistic, and I think that's the reason why it is the way it is. Okay, Cecil, is there anything else comment wise? Jeff, it looks like he had something, or is there anything that?
Yeah, Jeff's just continuing kind of making some of the points that you were making earlier about people, the lack of respect for the Eucharist and such.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, I think that is going to do it unless anybody has any further comments. I appreciate Jeff and Lisa, your being on the show. I don't know if you guys are on the email list or not. I put Timoteo on, and then he doesn't show up. Maybe I need to take him off again. But no, you're not obligated to show up every week. But we like to talk about deep stuff, and I don't know. I think it's good for the brain. I have a theory that philosophy will actually, and I don't know, will actually help you avoid, like dementia and stuff like that. I think you got. I think it's pretty much proven that you've got to keep your mind active. I mean, that's why people do like crossword puzzles when they get older and Sudokus and that kind of stuff. And oftentimes if people retire and their mind isn't being occupied doing something, they'll often just atrophy, right? And so got to keep our minds active. And what better way than learning about our faith, learning about theology, learning about philosophy, and the teachings of Saint Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologia. Thank you, Cecil, for being a part of the program, and thank you, Lisa and Jeff and all the other people that are watching on all of our platforms. If you want to join the email list, backtothefather@grnonline.com. We'll see you next Friday. God bless you. Thanks for watching.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.